Welcome to Bone2Pick, Hip-BoneMusic's Interview of the Month series. We are coming to you from Tokyo, Japan today, and I am thrilled and honored to have the opportunity to interview and speak with the great Peter Erskine, one of the great drummers of all time, one of the great musicians of all time. Peter and I are here playing with Bob Mintzer and his great big band at the Blue Note Tokyo. Peter, thanks so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, my very busy schedule today. Otherwise, I'd be shopping for a camera that I don't need but feel compelled to buy.
Excellent. Well, let's jump right in. You grew up in New Jersey, went to the Interlochen Arts Academy, and then from there went to Indiana University. Could you just talk about those early formative years a little bit?
Well, growing up in New Jersey, I began taking drum lessons at the age of 5. And at some point, when I was 6 years old, my drum teacher, a gentleman named John Severa, had heard about and mentioned to my mom the existence of these summer jazz band camps that were created and organized by Stan Kenton and Leon Breeden and Matt Benton, some of the famous jazz educators back in the late 1950s, early 60s. The camp was located in Bloomington, Indiana. Now, this was in the days before the interstate system was nearly completed, so it was quite a big deal for my parents to drive all the way from New Jersey to Indiana, but they did. And so I met my future boss, Stan Kenton, when I was 7 years old, and I went to this camp. And that became an annual summer trek to go to these camps. And that sort of sealed my fate, not only for where I would wind up going to college, but who I would wind up working with. Not only Stan Kenton, but another future boss, Joe Zawinul, was also at the summer camp because Cannonball Adderley's band was in residence. You know, you're a younger guy than I am, but back then, jazz was a dirty word in most schools. That's why we still have, lab bands, stage bands. I mean, pretty much everyone calls them jazz bands now, but back in the day, we had all these different euphemisms. Anyway, having gone to these camps in Indiana and meeting the gentleman who would become my teacher, Professor George Gaber, it seemed like I was destined to go to Indiana, to go to school. It was Gaber who told us about Interlochen Arts Academy, where I not only continued getting jazz education, but got a fair amount of classical training, or a lot of classical training actually. For a while I thought I wanted to be a symphonic percussionist, but playing drums is just too much fun. So anyway, got out of Interlochen a year early. I was 17 when I went to college for 1 year, playing in David Baker's band, and Stan Kenton called and asked if I'd like to come audition. They needed a drummer. So shortly after my 18th birthday, I went on the road with Stan.
That's awesome. Great to hear the whole lineage of that, and your association with Stan is such a famous thing, and it's great to hear how it all the beginnings of it. And obviously, talking about Stan, that was your first big professional job, and then going to Maynard Ferguson's band. Can you just talk about kind of that period of time when you were with Stan, and also with Maynard, and some of your memories of that?
Well, with Stan, we were on the road pretty much about 50 weeks a year. We got 10 days home for Christmas. I think that was more than you guys worked hard with Buddy, but Buddy took some time off for himself. Stan
Absolutely.
kind of had no place to go. He just wanted to be on the bus all the time. And when you're young, that doesn't matter, it's fun. In fact, I was playing on the Kenton band for a few days and was sharing an elevator with Stan up to our respective hotel floors after a gig, and he turned to me and said, Peter, we haven't discussed money yet. And so I looked at him and said, okay, how much do you want? And I think that was good for an extra $25 a week. Anyway, so I did that for 3 years and then finally got tired of it and went back to school and wanted to finish school, and so I was back in Indiana and had every intention of finishing. Maynard called. They needed a drummer, and I turned it down, and they called back and I turned it down. And 3 times they called, and finally I said, okay, I'll do it just for the summer. And first night I knew I wasn't going to go back to school. It's just so much fun to play in a big band. And so I did that for 2 years, and then that's what led to the Weather Report gig.
You know, talking about big band playing, I've been very fortunate in my career to play with many great big band drummers, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, Mel Lewis, just to name a few. But you are, without question, my favorite. And we were just talking about it before, like playing with you last night and the way you set up the figures. And it's like if you come in wrong now, then it's not going to happen. So it's really a pleasure to get an opportunity to play with you. And it's always, I mean, your sense of taste and obviously impeccable time and energy and just your musical, the way you adapt to everything is really astounding to I think to all of us. We're all just thrilled to be in the band and playing with you. Could you, you know, Bone2Pick is kind of mostly talks to brass players, and we focus on, you know, folks who have a big impact on brass, which you certainly do. Can you just share maybe some general ideas about your approach to big band playing as opposed to maybe small group playing?
Well, you know, when any band sounds good, everybody sounds better. And when a big band sounds good, the drums, they're more fun to play. And so when I was younger, I think I was more preoccupied with what do I play as a drummer. And then the more experience I got and the more confidence I got, it became more of what can I do to help the band play better, or how can I serve the music or whatever. But sometimes people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're very selfless, you're very artistic, you're very this, very that," and I usually smile and laugh to myself because it's like that joke I told you, the knock knock joke. But okay, that's sure. Knock knock.
Who's there?
Control freak. This is where you're supposed to say control freak too. When you're playing the drums, you have quite a bit of control over the destiny of a band. Loud,
certainly,
soft. Yeah. And last night was a good example. I mean, we were adding dynamics. Pretty much drummer driven. You know, I just brought it down, or I stopped at one point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's when it's really fun. And so when I'm playing that way for the band, it actually is opening lots of windows and doors for me just as a player. Because the drums are sort of improvising the whole time, even though I'm playing to the outline, it's like real-time Lincoln Logs or Lego toys for me, like 3D architecture. And I'm having so much fun trying to come up with just rhythms to either play in unison with the band. You know, so the brass section has written figures. So I can either play them parallel in unison, or I can do counterpoint. For example, in Beer and Bow, the bottom Powell tune that Bob's arranged. And it's a do. So at one point the brass have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, beep, 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 dun, 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 beep, beep, beep. So typically you do, boom, boom, boom. You would hit that accent with the band. Since this section repeats, the first time usually, or the second time, I switch it around, I might go boom, boom, ba, 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 boom, ba. And I kind of got that idea from an arranger who used to work with the Kenton band, Gene Rowland. If you remember that name,
sure.
Back. And we were rehearsing, and I thought, yeah, I'm really, I'm reading my ass off. I'm catching all these figures. And he came up to me afterwards, really like unimpressed, and he said, "Hey man," he said, "I got 15 guys playing these rhythms. I don't need you to play them too." And that kind of stood the whole idea on its head for me, because I thought that was the job. You know, but I was really playing the big band stuff like a circus drummer. So then I tuned in more to like the way Mel Lewis played, the way Nick Ceroli played, which is playing the holes. So Mel, with the band plays a thing, he plays the rest, not meaning the remainder, but the actual space.
Right.
And then I said, wow, that sounds great. So that's a little bit what I'm doing, even though Bob's Brazilian funk stuff, like we were talking about, has a fair amount of precision, so it does sound good for the drums sometimes to hit those accent bands. But I do like to try to serve it up on a plate.
Wow. That's great stuff. I mean, it sounds like, I mean, you seem to match with everybody you play with, but you and Bob are a great match, and it sounds like you're approaching it almost from a compositional arranging kind of point of view, as well as
Sort
from
of.
a drum point of view.
But we did a session once. We were at the Clinton Studios, and there was a figure. I think it looked like the and of four. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, ah, and I was into this thing. So we're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, ah, and I thought it was very clever, And right before we did the take, I remember Bob looked up to me and he went, "Oh yeah, Pete," he said, "Would you mind playing those figures with the rest of the band?" I said, okay.
So, weather report. Your membership and association with the band, vaulted your career to superstardom, I would say. And this is kind of a three-part question, and I know we could spend hours talking about that band.
I can spend hours talking about anything. It's my problem.
Could you just share maybe some of your favorite memories with the band? Also, a little bit about what it was like transitioning from the big bands into the preeminent small group of jazz at the time, and then lastly, not to put too much on your plate there, but lastly, the incredible connection that you and the great Jaco Pastorius had. If you could kind of maybe just touch on that a little bit.
Well, it was thanks to a brass player that I got on Weather Report, because trumpet player named Ron Tooley. You know Ron
Sure,
from New York,
sure.
and Ron was buddies with Jaco, and Ron was playing on Maynard's band, but he had played on Jaco's first solo album. Anyway, Ron called up Jaco when the band was playing in South Florida, expecting to get Jaco's answering machine, I think. And he was surprised when Jaco answered. They chatted a bit, and then Ron invited him down to the gig. And Jaco said, "Nah, it's okay. I heard you guys last time you were in town." And then Ron said, "Well, we got a new drummer. You might want to check this guy out." And then Jaco said, "Okay, I'll be there." So, all thanks to Ron Tooley,
Wow.
I
That's
met
great.
Jaco. And then I was commenting to my wife that it was 34 years ago exactly. What's today's date? 21st?
22nd today?
22nd. Anyway, it was June 19th. Here in Tokyo, there was a press conference, and I had just flown over with Weather Report. Hadn't played a concert yet. And so it's Joe Zawinul, Wayne Shorter, Jaco Pastorius, and the new drummer. And I was so new that on the posters they had this very athletic body of Alex Acuna, and they kind of superimposed my head. I said, "Wow, I didn't know I was in such good shape." No one really has any question for me, because nobody's really too sure who I am. Even though I'd been to Japan once with Kenton, once with Maynard. So finally a reporter goes, "I have a question for Peter Erskine." And he said, "You've played in the big bands of Stan Kenton and Maynard Ferguson. How does that qualify you to play with Weather Report?" Sort of like, "Why you?" Which was a good question, or a fair question. But I'm thinking like, "Geez, thanks a lot, I hadn't even played a note yet." So I start to give this, brilliant answer. Well, good music is good music, and so Zawinul grabs the mic and says, "Weather Report is a big band, and we're a small group too. Next question."
Beautiful.
So the band was very ensemble oriented, and it was Joe who taught me this idea of always compose when you play. And the trick with Weather Report was to make it confusing for people to know, are they improvising or are they playing something arranged? And so I think that influenced the way I do a lot of big band stuff too, because it's always, how much is there and how much just happened.
Yeah.
Which makes it's just more interesting, and I think it makes a little more electric atmosphere for the players. And you can only do that if the band is good.
Yeah.
I mean, if the band is good, I can take those kinds of, or make those choices, or take those liberties. And you know, do things that with a student band, I would, for example, I might have to be a little more careful.
Sure, yeah.
With doing it. So Weather Report was a great learning experience. But, you know, we all came out of big bands. I mean, Jaco worked with Peter Graves down in Florida.
Oh, right, okay,
played in his big band. Wayne and Joe were in Maynard Ferguson's band together.
Right.
And even though Joe and Wayne never heard me with either Kenton or Maynard, you know, I've always felt that had they never would have hired me. But they loved the idea that I played with the big band. And I think, especially with Kenton, they were kind of thinking of like a 50s Kenton.
Right.
So, you know, why big bands? We wrestle with this in music education all the time, right?
Sure.
You know, are we training people for jobs that don't exist? Well, there are professional big bands everywhere, but more importantly, the big band teaches you so much about musical teamwork and about phrasing and about all these things that whether you're playing in a duo or in a symphony orchestra, it's really helpful stuff. So big band really is, I mean, for me, it's the stallion of music ensembles. It's as much as I love small group and especially trios. I like doing really light trio work. There's nothing more satisfying than when a big band's firing on all cylinders and you're cruising. You know.
Yeah,
It's fun.
That's great. So you recorded 5 albums, correct, with the Weather Report. Do you have a favorite, or you have some thoughts about what was going on musically with the band during each one?
There's one tune on the 830 album called Sightseeing. It was a studio track we did, a Wayne Shorter tune. I've always kind of liked that one. I mean, it's a Weather Report tune that actually feels like this maybe contributed something to music. You know what I mean? And so yeah, it's just it's a good tune. It's a good recording. But they all have something special. I mean, so much of the music I recorded those years, you know, I don't like listening to it just because I'm self-critical. But some of that stuff, like, wow, it sounds pretty good, pretty okay.
Yeah, I'd say. So after your time with Weather Report, did you then move to New York?
Moved to New York.
And you played with everybody under the sun, of course. But I always think about your time with Steps Ahead and that the contribution you made to that great band. Can you take us through that time of your life when you were in New York, and maybe a little bit about what it was like playing with Michael Brecker, Mike Maneri, and Don Perlman?
Not to correct you, but I always feel it was more the contribution those guys made to my life. But Brecker was wonderful, and I was still doing some stuff with Jaco, and Jaco was exciting and a wild card, and finally he became very wild due to illness. But you know, I had a chance to work with Randy and Mincer with Jaco. I should say that, you know, Bob Mincer and I have known each other since 1969. We went to school at Interlochen Arts Academy.
I love that famous picture of you and Bob playing the bass.
Bob playing the bass, yeah. Because he just thought, like, I could play better bass than the kid is playing. So I went to New York with the encouragement and kind of the blessings and kind of the encouragement of Joe Zawinul, who said, you know, if you really want to be a jazz musician, you got to go to New York. Which led to my leaving Weather Report, but I was thrilled to get to work with Brecker and Maneri, and I was a fan of Brecker, Maneri, and Gomez ever since I was young. And Don Grolnick was a newer name for me. He probably became my closest friend out of all those guys. And then when Don left, Ileani Elias came in to play. And then when Ileani left the band, Warren Bernhardt played, and then Eddie Gomez split. Tom Kennedy played for a little while, and then Victor Bailey
Sure.
who had worked with Albanol, and then we went from keyboards to Chuck Loeb.
Mhm.
So the band, you know, personnel started changing, and then eventually I left and moved to California. But the New York years were fun. I was also doing a lot of stuff with John Abercrombie, and playing in that kind of a setting without keyboards and without arrangements really was very helpful in terms of not being so muscle bound when I played, and I had to change a lot of playing habits. You know, you get into habits. I mean, I've never heard you be habit, but I'm sure on the trombone you could get into
Sure, yeah.
the habits. And drumming wise, you do too. So habits didn't work with a musician as fluid as John Abercrombie. Of course, we're getting away from the brass discussion, but
No, it's all applicable too, I think. I think it's a really good point.
yeah, it's cliches or habits or playing what you know or playing from muscle memory is really the I don't want to say it's the death of the creative spark, but it does. I find it just really paints you into a corner so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you very little room to maneuver. So I don't know if some of your questions later would lead to this, but this all the way I'm teaching now, the way I think about a lot of music, it just has to do with intent, kind of, and rhythmically how you're feeling the subdivisions. And if you're tuned in enough to a piece of music or something, like last night, how we could stop, but it didn't feel like, oh, it stopped, it's a bad thing. It was like, oh, it stopped. You could still feel the rhythm going because we stopped with you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So